Hi, everyone. Welcome to Turning Point, Stories and Strategies from the World of Business. I'm your host, Blaine Birch, co-founder and CEO at Dryrun. And joining me today, I'm really excited to have Corey Lansdell, co-founder and creative director of Pulp Studios, Inc. in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. Thanks for joining me today, Corey.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Thanks very much for inviting me to come and chat with you.
Yeah, I've been excited to have you on. Corey and I have known each other we've known each other for at least a decade or definitely more, I would suspect by now.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, and I'm always sort of keeping track of Corey. Of course, I was in the creative industry, before Dryrun, and so I know Corey for his exceptional illustration abilities. If you want to see some of his work, their work, actually head over to pulpstudios.ca, I believe it is.
Yeah, that's right.
And check it out. You can, and I definitely recommend looking at the awards page, which is a nice long list of, was it creative arts, was it, I think?
Yeah, applied arts.
Applied arts, that's what I'm looking for.
No, sorry, just a number of awards through applied arts, through the studio, yeah, and some ACE awards through the Ad Club of Edmonton.
Yeah, I know when I was in the creative industry, Applied Arts was just one of those cornerstone magazines, and so to see you guys plastered all over it is a really cool thing. And I know you've sort of branched out into animation and even into developing some of your own IP. So there's lots of cool stuff that I'd like to catch up on and explore today. But before we dive into that, maybe we can go back to how did you get started in business? What was your first move into the business world?
Sure, yeah. I mean, it's a long story, but I'll try to keep it brief. So after graduating from university in 2004, my first job was working with Elk Island Public School Board in their creative department. I was a junior graphic designer there for about a year and a half, I think. And during that time, I had kind of started doing some freelance stuff on the side while I was working there. And I kind of cut my teeth, I guess, in terms of the business aspect or the practical side of running a graphic design studio while working with the team at Elk Island Public School Board. And I was fortunate to have a really solid and strong senior designer over top of me, and the managerial staff was amazing too. And so I kind of learned the aspects of just like dealing with printers, the practical aspects that I just kind of didn't get as much of through the university experience. Mm-hmm. But I saw sort of like a limit to the ceiling working at that studio, because as long as really there was only two designers there. So it was either I was a junior designer or I was a senior designer. It's like kind of like that's my options. And so it was kind of crazy because right around the time that I started my kind of pulled away from that full-time job and started my own business, my wife was pregnant with our first child. And I was like, now's a good time. We're going to have a child soon. I'll just start my own thing. So it was kind of crazy, but I really felt I was being kind of led in that direction. And it was getting hard to juggle both, because my business, which at that time was Live Pixel Design, was the name of my first sort of design business, just like out of my basement, doing a lot of like your run-of-the-mill graphic design projects, a little bit of identity work, brochures, some annual reports and reports to the communities and stuff like that for different organizations, a little bit of multimedia stuff. Back then it was like putting things onto a disc through Flash, some kind of like multimedia interactive thing. And so that was kind of neat and challenging, right? Just like as a very young designer trying to, I guess, get my wings and, fly on my own, doing the business side of running a creative studio as well as the creative side, and trying to manage all that stuff on my own out of my basement was very challenging and required lots and lots of hours. I remember putting in a lot of 14, 16-hour days during that time, just trying to get, make some traction and get a clientele to have some stability, which I feel like being in the creative industry, I don't know if we've ever achieved that stability for all my years of being an entrepreneur. It's a constant pursuit. But yeah, that was kind of like my first job. And that design business I ran from, I think, about like mid 2005 till about 2009. I was just working kind of by myself. Although in 2000 and think it was 2007, I started working almost like on a full-time contract basis with the government of Alberta and their education ministry. And at that time, I kind of reconnected with a high school friend of mine who we kind of grew up doing art together and making comic books and writing stuff in high school when I met him in grade 11. And he was working in the same contract. So we were working alongside each other from 2007 to 2009-ish when we started Pulp Studios.
Okay, and so how did that like, so you guys, I guess, sort of both made the leap at once, and how did that sort of work?
Yeah, well, because we were really, I mean, it was awesome because Kelly and I have been friends for a long time, and it was neat kind of having, it was sort of this, I don't know, a real blessing to be able to have the opportunity to collaborate on stuff in sort of a safe space without the risk, you know what I mean? So like we
Yeah.
were both on contract making a decent income through that contract, but we were separate businesses at that time, just like sole proprietorships.
Mhm.
And we just kind of reconnected on a creative level and we're able to collaborate on projects in that creative space. And it was in sort of the slowdown around 2008, and then things started tapering off through
Yeah.
that contract. And so we were just kind of like, work was slowing down there, and we were like, well, what's going on? We didn't know what we were going to each individually do, and we just kind of were talking about, well, what if we started something together and
Mhm.
put our minds together? We sort of had this mentality of 1 + 1 = 4, or whatever the saying is.
Yeah.
I do believe that it turned out to be true. The value of having a partner has been immense in personal and creative, just
Mhm.
in terms of business and life. And fortunate to have Kelly as my business partner. I know there's a lot of tales out there about, you know, friends getting into business together and doesn't always work out, but
Yeah.
I don't know, for whatever reason, our personalities are very compatible, and we've just been able to really work well together for all these years. So we're just basically in our 11th year right now as a studio.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah, which is crazy. But yeah, and so it was just the kind of the impetus for starting something really was just predicated on the slowdown, and it
Yeah.
just sort of pushed us in a direction. So
It's interesting how many entrepreneurs I've had on, and like myself included, 2008, 2009, that was really a fundamental shift for our business. And
mhm.
we did okay through the slowdown, but and we actually started to, grow again. But really it ended up being the inception for what became Dryrun later, just that experience. It's amazing how many entrepreneurs I've had on the show that have talked about kind of the earlier dot bomb in the early 2000s, the 2008, and then it's like every 10 years. And now
Yeah,
the same sort of thing is happening now, but it's amazing when you look back, how many changes and how much innovation, and a lot of it is
yeah.
changes in the end for the better, where you guys, found your path and actually started a business together that's done some really amazing things.
Yeah, yeah, it is. It's that sort of catalyst, right? Sometimes you need to push to take that step into the unknown,
Yeah.
which can be scary. And I've done it a couple times now, but it's still constantly sort of, I don't know, there's part of me as a creative person that is constantly striving towards sort of new ground or new territory.
Yeah.
And so, I think that within the context of Pulp Studios, I've had the opportunity to pursue some of that stuff, and we haven't
Mhm.
needed to sort of like branch out and really pull ourselves away from the studio as a whole. I've been able to kind of do things within the studio. Even like the studio itself, when we first started, we were kind of generalists. So we were doing sort of everything from app development to websites to print to illustration. And it was like kind of the gambit of stuff, which looking back, it was kind of like we just sort of did that. We like almost arbitrarily. It wasn't really a plan, but it was just trying to feed the beast. And so we just kind of took whatever work we could get. And we ended up having between 2012, I think, and 2013, or maybe 2011 and 2013, we had like full-time staff underneath us. So at one point, I think we had 5 people working with us on a regular basis, and then a number of contractors that we were working with as well. So we're starting to get to that sort of like from small to sort of medium size potentially. We had one really, really large project that was bringing in a bunch of work. And this is sort of the learning side of the business part of things, is sort of, we sort of took for granted a little bit that that was just kind of the new Pulp Studios. This is the way we're going to run. We're going to have a studio, we're going to have staff. But then in 2013, that project ended, and it was sort of difficult to find enough work to sustain it. And so we ended up letting everybody go, just shrinking back down to the two of us again, and sort of refocusing at that point. The original idea with the studio was to just purely pursue illustration work.
Yeah.
And we sort of were lucky at the start. We started off the studio with kind of a cool project that was actually it was in collaboration with G. Skinner in Edmonton.
Mm-hmm.
But the end client was Microsoft. It was right at the time when they were switching, when Flash was kind of dying. And they were trying to put stuff onto HTML5. And so we were looking at building this game that was built solely in HTML5. So the technical side of everything was handled by G. Skinner and their team. And we did all the animation and all the creative on the assets and stuff. We built this little video game. So that was a really cool, opportunity for us as a tiny studio to have like a kind of a higher profile project that gave us a little bit of a push out of the gate. And so in 2013, we sort of stopped this generalist idea, and we sort of looked at each other and we're like, what are we doing? Like, what do we really want to be doing?
Yeah.
And that's when we sort of started to make the push towards animation, because animation is a really nice bridge creatively where it pulls in everything that we are sort of passionate about. There's illustration, strong illustration component, strong story components, and then there's sort of that technical design aspect that kind of floats in there too.
Yeah.
And so it's been a great space for us to work in. And that's primarily what we've been doing since then.
Well, yeah. And it's kind of interesting because that little bit of a challenge in 2013, a big contract ends, and it forces you to look and go, okay, where do we want to be? What do we want to do? And I know that space, like you kind of get to that point where it's either, okay, we grow big and we get a lot more staff, but you just, like you said, you have to feed the beast. And it isn't really about, it's not as creative or craft anymore. It's at the top. It's just like, we need sales. We need to run the business.
Exactly.
And so it sounds like, again, that it was sort of a gift and something that you guys learned, I think, faster than a lot of businesses, where you say, okay, what are we really good at? What are we passionate about? What do we want to be the best at? Let's focus on that and do it the way we want to do it. And that's a real gift in business to be able to, figure that out probably before you maybe expanded further and had even more staff. And pretty soon you're like, well, we just got to keep going, right?
Yeah, for sure. Definitely. And it's been great. It's been fairly stable for the studio. Of course, the last year here has been really tough, as it has been for everyone.
Yeah.
But just financially, I guess, and project wise, it's just it feels like everything's got a much longer tail on it than it should right now. And so that's a bit of a juggling challenge. But yeah, it's still been great. The type of work that we've gotten to do through this sort of new direction has been really tremendous. A lot of really valuable work. And so, I mean, where Kelly and I have a passion for story and we want to do stuff that's kind of narrative based, we don't really get a lot of chance to do that in our day-to-day. Our day-to-day is more like explainer videos and kind of on the technical side of things, right? So, advertising a widget or explaining a process within a company for members or stakeholders or whatever, things of that nature is kind of the typical, type of video that we do. Like we did a really interesting one about sort of nanotechnology in relationship to the pulp and paper industry, and this little sort of a byproduct of the process of creating pulp that then is used in all kinds of applications in a technical sense. And so that's like a weird kind of thing that, is sort of a technical animation, but we try to put some character and some fun stuff into it. But yeah, the majority of our projects are along that line.
Yeah, it's boy, you sparked a memory that I don't think I've thought about in probably 15 years or something. But at one time we it's just some of those projects that actually stood out in my mind when I had a studio, and it was the most fun ones were just like you said, it's just like, it's interesting and you get to peer behind the curtain and learn a bunch of stuff. And I remember
Mhm.
we did a video on a chronic wasting disease. And,
Hmm.
you know, so we went out, we were on like elk farm and we were filming elk
Yeah.
on the elk farm. And we were, you know, at these, we were at like a lab that was like a level 3 lab that no one can get
Hmm.
into, but fortunately we got in there right before they certified it. So it was almost ready to go. We got to see everything. We got to have the people in there cutting up little bits of elk brain. Um, but like basically a
Crazy.
week later, they would have based like, you know, whatever they do to get it certified, and then no one's getting in. Right.
Yeah.
And then we did a, 3D animations of prions and stuff. And it was just one of those things where it's some of those projects, there's so many projects that it's like, it brings money in the door. And then there's ones that are, just really interesting. Right.
Hmm.
And, just, that was what you reminded me of. That it's just, some of these projects are just, you learn a lot and you get to see
Hmm.
stuff and do stuff that you never thought you would. And it's,
Yeah.
I'd forgot about that, but it's kind of a fun job when you get to do stuff like that.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I think some of the best stuff, projects that we've been a part of, we've got one client that we've collaborated with for many years, like right from the start of the studio, Native Counseling Services of Alberta.
Mhm.
And so that's been incredible from a creative's perspective, because we've gotten to partner with them and on really important projects, helping the Indigenous community with all kinds of struggles and challenges that they're facing, which for
Mhm.
me is it's a real special point for me. And I sometimes tell this story. I'll just share a little bit, but like in my family, on my mom's side, I'm like a first generation Canadian. My mom's from England, so she was
Mhm.
born in England and then she moved here. And I feel this kind of like interesting connection to the challenges that the Indigenous community has played here, and my role in it as sort of like, not very far away from removed from sort of a colonization model, right? And
Mhm.
these projects have been a real blessing for me to be able to be a part of, because I feel like we're bringing some good into the situation to sort of
Yeah.
bridge some gaps. And that's like really really super amazing for me as a creative to be a part of those projects. And
Mhm.
knowing that, for example, some of the projects that we've worked on with them, 8 years ago or whatever, are still being used on a regular basis
Yeah.
in law enforcement organizations or social work organizations, where they're using them to sort of teach around principles in terms of interacting with the Indigenous community, and how to, in a healthier manner, sort of be a part of that world and be a part of helping. And that's
Yeah.
tremendous, right? So knowing that like we're working on stuff that might, impact one kid's life or a family's situation, those are the ones that really, really matter and really mean a lot to Kelly and I, where, we love doing that kind of work.
Yeah.
And it just feels great to be able to use our skills to sort of build the world, right, and to bring some
Yeah.
good into the world. So
Well, and I think there's like that's where you and I are have that sort of similar belief, and I think that's why we ended up sort of doing what we were doing, and even the way our
mm,
studio had sort of headed was we were never interested in selling more shampoo bottles.
right.
It was
Yeah.
always you know, and there's people that do that, but there for us
Hmm.
it was always felt like we want to do stuff that we feel like it matters, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And even now with Dryrun, that's our driving force is we're doing something that we just really believe matters, and it makes
And it does.
all of the struggles more, you know, easier to overcome, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it does, right? And like that's like I've shared with you before, like the platform that you guys have has really been a benefit to us as a studio, and it's like you wouldn't I like I wouldn't have I wasn't really looking for when I came across Dryrun, and when you invited me to try out, I think it was the beta back then, or maybe
Yeah.
the alpha state. I don't know what it
Yeah.
was, but
It was one of
you
them. Yeah.
yeah, you invited me to sort of try it out. And it's interesting, right, from a small business perspective at that point, because it was like it was right around the time when we had to kind of downsize.
Mhm.
And part of the reason why we had to downsize is because we didn't have our head in the numbers, right? And so we were always sort of operating from a point of emotion and just
Mhm.
like, well, this is what we're doing, and not really having an eye on that stuff. And I remember getting Dryrun and just being like, oh wow, this is revealing. Like it gave me a really interesting picture of the business from a different angle. And as I said to you before, one of the biggest things for me was it removed some of the emotion around numbers. Like the decision making went from well, I really feel like we should be doing this too. This is what we should be doing based on the numbers, right? And
Yeah.
like just giving us like clarity on that, right? And removing some of those tough decisions, right? Just kind of giving
Yeah.
us like it's almost like an allowance to make those tough decisions, right? As a business owner. And
Yeah.
that's, as a creative, some of those, sometimes that's the hardest part, right? Around business is like some of those challenging numbers and like business operational decisions are difficult from a creative's perspective, right? And
Yeah.
so a very powerful tool and a meaningful tool that you guys have created in this similar kind of thing, right? Like the work that we've been able to do, hopefully is impacting the community in a positive way, and getting people down a path towards healing and stuff like that. And in a sense, Dryrun's kind of a similar thing from a business perspective. It's giving like this ability to, in a healthy way, kind of have conversations that are difficult, right? So yeah, that's cool. And that's like, yeah, as a creative and a business owner, it's amazing to get a chance to do that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and thanks for the plug.
No,
We
yeah.
really appreciate that too.
No, it's
Uh,
true, and I've
you
always
know,
said that to you, right? Like I've always expressed a similar thing, right? I mean, we've had conversations in the past, right? And it's like, yeah, it's an indispensable tool for us. That, I don't know if that's the right word, an invaluable tool,
I think, well,
you
no,
know?
either's correct, but no, I'm
Yeah.
glad. No, I'm thrilled to hear that, and I know I always valued your input on, especially when we were in those very early days trying to figure out,
Mm,
how
yeah.
we were going to solve this and everything, and but it's true, and it's a different mentality running a business when it's not about the bottom line. The bottom line's secondary.
Mm,
It's about feeling like you're changing. They always say, entrepreneur wants to change the world, but that's truly
yeah.
what gets you up in the morning, gets gets you excited, and so it's and I think a lot of creatives have that drive. That's just sort of, we have this drive
Yeah.
to create, and you want to leave something meaningful, right?
Totally. Absolutely. Yeah. And yeah, we're not like right now, we don't, one of the hard parts around that time that we downsized was we had these young creatives that I really kind of felt a responsibility towards. And
Mm-hmm.
I didn't want to let them go. Right. And that's where we ran into cash flow troubles, because I was like clinging on to this, you know, parenting sort of fathering business perspective. Right. Um, but like now we don't have employees, but we collaborate with all kinds of people and on a regular basis. So there's still sort of, in some ways, we sort of have an opportunity to continue to provide that sort of like benefit to other creatives in the industry that we're collaborating with through employing them essentially, right? Even
Mm-hmm.
though it's not like a formal employee-employer relationship,
Yeah.
that those contracts are so amazing and important to us as a studio.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, and getting to a spot where the studio is, healthier and more responsible about our financial aspects of things has allowed us to continue to do that, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
It's
and
good.
it gives you freedom, right? It gives you freedom
Hmm.
to, and I know we've talked about this over, I don't know, coffee or beer or something over the years, of what, how do you grow, like, which way do you go, and what gives you the freedom to do what you want to do? And you guys have found a way to tackle some big projects, but kind of do what you want to do. And actually, it's a nice little segue here into um, how you guys have been able to basically run the studio, but also now start to
Hmm.
go into those ambitions where you build your own intellectual property, that you
Yeah.
start building something that you're really passionate about, and you don't have to have a client for it. And I wanted to explore that a little bit, because I know you guys have been, down a journey to build some of that.
Hmm, for sure. Yeah. So I think I want to say 2014. So we've always been interested in sequential art, so comic books, right? And my business partner, especially Kelly, is a fanatic about comics, and his level of knowledge is like second to none. I'll put him on a trivia show about comics any day and bet on him.
Yeah.
And I'm not a betting guy, so that's saying something.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, we've always had this passion towards creating sequential art. And we've had an opportunity to do some stuff within the studio. We've done some work with an organization called Teach Magazine out in Toronto. We
Mhm.
created a couple of comic books for them, educational books. One was on Sir Wilfrid Laurier, and then we recently did one around the Group of Seven.
Oh,
which
interesting.
I think it's out, might be out now. I'm not super sure, but we wrote it and then worked with another artist to do the artwork for them. But Kelly worked with Native Counseling Services, Senator Patty Laboucan Benson. She, at the time that Kelly worked on the book, she was the sort of the operations manager at NCSA, and now she's in the Senate. But she had taken her doctoral thesis and put it into a comic book graphic novel format, and the graphic novel is called The Outside Circle. So if anybody's interested in graphic novels around generational trauma and in relationship to, you know, residential school system and all those pieces, they should seek out The Outside Circle and pick it up. You can buy it at like Staples, or not Staples, Chapters or whatever, like where books are sold, Indigo, or online. But really, really amazing graphic novel. She basically put a story around all of her research around generational trauma and healing. And Kelly drew it. And so it was a long project, but about a year and a half, I think, or maybe almost 2 years, that Kelly did sort of like in conjunction with running the business with me. He was sort of doing the art for this comic book. And so because of that, he had an opportunity to go and do some speaking engagements at different locations. And in 2014, we were invited out to, or he was invited out to the Toronto Comic Arts Festival, so TCAF. And I just tagged along just to kind of check out the festival. And we had set up a couple meetings with some children's book publishers out there just to try and look at opportunities. So this was sort of like the point at which we started to think about potentially pursuing stuff inside of the publishing industry, kind of piggybacking off of Kelly's experience working on a book that's going to be published, and then sort of our own sort of interests in narrative and sequential art. And at the time, I was really focused on trying to get into children's books. I kind of had like this idea that I could do children's books as a medium, and had some interesting meetings, and then some back and forth with like Owl Kids and some other publishers around some of my books. They kind of fell flat, but I do aspire at some day down in the future to get those books together and pitch them into some publishers. But that's kind of where what was sort of like the catalyst point of us starting down this journey of putting together some intellectual properties. And so on the flight back, well, it was kind of, so I guess kind of rewind a little bit. Before we went to TCAF, I was playing around with a crazy idea for a character. And it was just a random thing. I was doing some sketches in my sketchbook of a one-armed knight with a unibrow. So this knight in like a cartoony knight in like knight get up, and he had one arm and a unibrow. And I was like, I went to Kelly and I was like, this is a thing. And he's like, what are you? You're crazy. And it just kind of fell off. I was like, his name's Einabrow. It's like one brow, right? It's like stupid. But anyways, we took a little a promo image around that story with us to Toronto when we went to our meetings. And one of the publishers was like, what is this image? They're like, this is a kid's graphic novel. Like, this is an all ages graphic novel. We were like, oh, we never thought of that. We actually had intended on turning it into a 2D platforming video game. Like, that was sort of the original idea for the IP, was that we would sort of write a story around it and turn it into a platformer game for online, right? Something simple. And so that was kind of on the flight back. We were like, oh, it's actually a graphic novel. Well, let's start writing. So on the flight back to Edmonton, we were just writing. And we just kind of started the process of writing that story, which we took to, what year was it? 2016, maybe. We went to Comic-Con in San Diego with a 12 or a 14 page or whatever little promo book that we took down there and passed around to a whole bunch of people. Had a couple publishers interested in it, but it didn't get off the ground. And so that was kind of our first foray into pitching a story. And the format, it was kind of like an exploration in formatting. So we created a little comic book, basically, is how we went to go pitch it. We turned the first 10 pages of the story into like finished artwork and story, so that it was like a little comic book with a couple pages of information about us as artists and about the studio and about what our intentions are with the book and stuff. And then talking about some of our previous publishing experience with our clients. And so, so that was our first pitch. that we kind of sent around. We ended up sending it to a number of different publishers through the mail and such as well after. And Kelly is really, because of his experience and knowledge of the comic book industry, not just comics and the story, but he really delves into, who's the writer working on what book. He can look at a piece of art and know who inked it. He's pretty adept and has a deep knowledge of the industry as a whole.
Yeah.
So we've kind of leaned on that to sort of start to target who we're aiming books at and pitches at.
Yeah.
And so I don't know if you're familiar with the graphic novel industry right now, but comic book industry, but
no, not really at all. No.
So in the last 5 years, the all ages graphic novels or kids line of graphic novels has been like a huge growth industry. There's been a huge growth in that sector of the publishing industry specifically. And so we started to, Einabrow was kind of like this, the way we pitch it, like the sort of high level pitch is like, what if the Legend of Zelda and Monty Python had a baby? And that's kind of what the story is. It's like super absurd and kind of like crazy adventure stuff, but it's really out there. So we kind of took that idea and we said, well, what if we write a story that is more targeted at a younger audience and is meaningful? And so this is where we've kind of landed in this sweet spot, which sort of blends what I was talking about with our work with NCSA, that sort of meaningful work that is hopefully going to, advance, emotional health in the world, I guess is kind of the way that I would put it. We've sort of taken that sentiment and put it into our stories. So all the stories that we work on right now, the pitch ideas have a measure of sort of not self-help, but we really love the idea of a story being engaging and exciting for kids, but also something that raises conversation around important issues that kids might be facing. And so, our first story touches on loss and grief. The one that we've successfully kind of put through the pitch, and it's been picked up, and we're just about finished the writing on it right now. Another pitch that we're working on deals with anger and some substance abuse items, but it's coming at it from a perspective that hopefully kids can access, right? And then it just starts to give some accessibility to some of those difficult conversations. So that's sort of our heart, is like to tell these stories that have a real meaning. And even with Einabrow, even though it was like ridiculous and crazy and it's out there, it's a very like, there's a heart to the story that's about sort of sibling relationships and sibling rivalries and stuff like that. So yeah, so that's kind of where we're at in terms of like where we're at right now with the publishing. One of the big reasons for us, I guess, to pursue this was I guess a couple reasons. One, we really want to create our own IPs. It's just a creative drive that we have and tell our own stories. We're very focused on narrative and story. And so this is a way for us to have an opportunity to do something that we're excited about and not just somebody else's hands and feet or wrist or whatever you call it. So it's a nice outlet for us creatively. And then also there is like a business side to it. So, as you know, like you've kind of gone through that studio life and what that's like. It's kind of a hamster wheel at times where you're sort of on this wheel of repetitive sort of nature.
Yeah. Always need the next deal.
Yeah. Chasing projects, right? Chasing project, get the project out. And it just feels, it can, as a creative person at times feel overwhelming and a little bit like stifling to your drive and motivation. And so this is a nice way, it's an outlet for us to be able to sort of get past that and also hopefully switch over our revenue streams a little bit. So right now the model that we're using is that any income, any proceeds that comes from, the advance on a project or in the future sales on a project will go into the studio, and then we'll sort of reinvest it into creating more IPs and building out sort of this studio or a story side of our studio that is sort of focused on creating IPs and developing this. We kind of have a goal right now and I'm not sure how realistic it is, but our goal right now is by 2030 to have 10 books published. And so hopefully our goal is to have 10 books that are sort of perennial, sellers and are out there. And that would be, if we could get that would sort of generate, kind of a nice stable base for that side of the business, I think.
Yeah. Well, and you frankly, you got the first one right? Like you've got a deal for the first one,
Mhm.
and I suspect that
Yeah.
is probably the hardest one to get. And so I know it's like before we started filming, you're telling me, you know, a lot of it's under NDA still and everything, so you can't share very
Mhm.
much. But uh, you know, I would encourage everyone, just follow Pulp Studios, follow Corey on I guess Facebook or whatever, so that when you do have it out in the wild, everyone can kind of find out about it. But it's a you know, a big congratulations on basically getting that deal. Those are not easy to get, and that's a massive step forward. And it just is something to be really, you know, excited about.
Mhm.
I'm excited to see you know, whatever comes out the other side. So yeah, it's exciting.
Yeah, it's awesome. And we've had the good fortune of, you know, it's funny with the publishing world. It's I mean, we've been working at getting into it for a number of years now, right? So it is slow and it's challenging. We were fortunate. We didn't pitch this story that's got picked up to like hundreds, you know, sometimes you hear like, well, I sent it to hundreds and hundreds of publishers. We sent it to, I don't know, I think it was under 10, and we were fortunate to have it picked up. And part of that success, so it's a similar kind of model. So with all the stories that we're doing right now, Kelly and I are just working on, we're the writers. So we're not doing the creative. Well, I shouldn't say that. We're art directing and we're working on early concept stuff. And then we're working with talented illustrators to carry the project to completion. And in this case, we're working with a third party who is, we've brought in as like an equal partner with us. And so
Mhm.
on the project. And so she is doing all the artwork for the book. And right now she's in the process of
Yeah.
drawing it as we're finishing it. And it's kind of like some people have said, well, don't you wish you were drawing it? And I'm kind of like, not really. Like, I'm sort of at a stage right now in my career where it's like I love seeing the pages that she gives back to me, and I get so much joy out of seeing her bring our story to life that it's like I don't need to be doing anything like
Yeah.
creatively in that respect. I love telling the stories and I love seeing someone else interpret that and bring it to life. It's just really rewarding. It's been really, really tremendous.
Yeah.
And that, you know, she was part of the pitch process too, so we involved her and we paid. That's a kind of an interesting dynamic, right, where it's like you're sort of paying someone up front to put pages or artwork together. So we paid out of
Mhm.
Pulp Studios income to get that started, and then sort of going from there, it's kind of a deal where we're sort of splitting stuff. But
Yeah.
yeah, just a tremendous, really cool process. And so all of our pitches were kind of looking at it that way. I honestly would
Mhm.
love to just be a writer. Like I just enjoy
Yeah.
writing so much and telling the stories. So it's an interesting, different sort of like switch of the dynamic in terms of my creative outlets.
Yeah.
And like as you know, I'm scratching my artistic creative itch on the side, doing a whole bunch of like portraits and stuff all the time. I'm always painting and pursuing those kinds of things on my sort
Yeah.
of own time. So I've always got like a number of different things in the works. I'm working on a couple novels too, which I'm slowly chipping away at those. And those are sort of
Yeah.
my own endeavors that are sort of apart from Pulp Studios, and they're more
Mhm.
just focused on like fantasy, like science fiction fantasy writing.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Oh, it's, man, you always got lots going on, and it's always so
yeah,
creative. Yeah, it's always interesting to talk with you. Well, we've been going for a while here. I guess I should let you go. So I know you got lots to do this afternoon, but
yeah, no problem.
um, this was a really interesting conversation, and really enjoyed it. And again, if you can remind people how to find you if they would like to, you know, see your work or chat with you, talk about your books, or learn more about when those will be coming out, how should they track you down?
Yeah, for sure. So the best place to find us, I think we do a lot of, so for Pulp Studios specifically, you can go to pulpstudios.ca. And if there's any big news, we'll definitely be putting stuff on there. But there's also Facebook. We're kind of consistent with putting information about the studio there. So I think it's just Pulp Studios Inc. on Facebook. And then Pulp Studios on Twitter, and Pulp Studios Inc. I think on Instagram. But you can find us on all those sort of social media platforms. Um, that's one area that we need to get a little more aggressive in, is our social media presence with the studio. We haven't been super active that way.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, for me personally, if people want to follow Corey Lansdell at sorry, on Instagram, it's just Corey Lansdell, so just my name, and Twitter as well. And that's, I'm I'm pretty consistently active on my social media on that side of things.
Mm.
And yeah, that'd be great. And of course, once we get info about these books, once we're allowed to share more, we're going to start pushing that out there for sure. And you'll be able to find out more about that. So
Yeah, terrific. Well, I'm looking forward to seeing them when they get out in the
yeah,
flesh, so to speak. So
yeah, it's going to be a cool sort of another leg of the adventure, right? So
yeah, absolutely. Oh, thanks so much, Corey. I really appreciate it. Thanks for joining me today. And everybody, again, just a quick reminder: if you're looking for some help, monitoring, managing, modeling your cash flow, please check us out at dryrun.com. We're there to help you and happy to chat anytime. Thanks so much, Corey.
yeah, my pleasure. Thanks. It was awesome.